Good afternoon again. And in an attempt to shake off the post lunch sleepiness, I will start with a completely random slide. Now, that is the London Stock Exchange and the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. And I will leave you with two questions. Why would I mention stock exchanges in a database conference? And secondly, what do the London Stock Exchange and the Johannesburg Stock Exchange have in common? Parking the questions aside for the moment, let's proceed. I am going to be presenting a case study about, there you go, my two questions. And I'm going to be presenting a case study about the ethical challenges that we faced in setting up and maintaining the Sri Lankan Twin Registry. And I will briefly talk about the Twin Registry, more importantly, the ethical challenges that we faced and how the IRD, the Institute for Research and Development, which set up and maintained the Twin Registry, dealt with those challenges. And I will finish with the discussion of two key points. Firstly, that capacity building, both human and institutional, is an imperative and that it can be done in LMIC, and briefly mention an example where it has already been achieved very effectively by a different sector. Secondly, I would like to point out one small step that can be taken to level the playing field a little bit more and conclude with that. So this is our twin registry. The Sri Lankan Twin Registry, it was established in 1996 with funding from the Wellcome Grant, and it has population-based register of about 10,000 twin pairs, and volunteer register of about 7,000 twin pairs. It is the first and largest twin register in an LMIC. Most importantly, it is one of the still functional twin registries, which has been operating for over 20 years in an LMIC. The Colombo Twin and Singleton study, or COTAS 1 and 2, were the two waves of data research that was done using this twin registry, and it led to about 20 publications, and more are still pending. In 2012, the biobank was established with serum and, with serum and DNA samples of about 3,000 twin pairs. And in 2018, this work was extended further with the establishment of an infant and child twin and adolescent twin registry for mental health research with a pump priming grant from the Medical Research Council, UK. So that is about that. Now I'm very bad at managing these slides alongside speaking, so I'm going to go ahead and then put the slide through to you. So to speak about the numerous ethical challenges we faced, it was partly because ethics was at a very early stage of codification in Sri Lanka. And we faced difficulties from basic things such as obtaining ethics approval, and also we had difficulties in that we did not have much guidance on how to deal with international collaborations. Our partners were King's College London, and we were funded by the Wellcome Trust UK, and they were very influential collaborators. Whilst they were very supportive and were very generous indeed, we did not have much experience, nor did we have anyone to guide us or any literature to guide us on how we could deal with these collaborations. Right, then we had problems because people did not necessarily trust us. This is the headlines that came up. They said we were double dealing on genetic twins data. And there was a negative media campaign which highlighted and said that we were selling out the genetic information of Sri Lankan twins to, yes, I can hear some laughing, but that was what happened, that we were accused of selling out genetic twins data to multinational corporations for unknown nobody specified what exactly was going to be done with it, but I think not knowing is probably more scaremongering than anything else. So this is what we were accused of. And there was a very negative press and media campaign that tried to derail the research that we were doing at the time. So the IRD decided that we had to deal with these issues head on, not just to deal with an issue as and when it came up, issue by issue, but that we had to take a broad-based approach to deal with the mistrust that the public had about us. We took 3 different steps that I shall be talking about now. So the first one was that we needed to achieve true community engagement. We needed to establish trust, as was mentioned earlier. Establishing trust was the key measure that the IRD identified as was necessary to, in order to carry out effective research among this community. And so the IRD responded by, firstly, we acknowledged that this trust issues and the concerns that the public had was a valid concern, given that there had been unethical activities by researchers in the past. And our response for this was to engage in a wide media campaign to sensitize professionals, such as teachers, for example, then to create awareness about the research, create awareness amongst the twin participants about the research that was done, because we believe that we needed to help the twins recognize and associate themselves with the research and identify themselves as part of a very valid and important research effort that would be of global benefit, not that they were being used to provide data and that they would be disregarded later. So one of the very effective measures that helped us to engage these twins was cultural activities. If you can see some of these slides here, music, dance, singing, then other things like essay writing, even basic things, were very helpful to engage these twins with the research institution. They built a strong relationship with the researchers, and that helped us to build a relationship of trust. Jonathan Ives, who is here today with a poster presentation about the pilot research work he's doing in Sri Lanka, he found that recently that potential research participants were less concerned about the actual mechanics or the fully understanding the research that was being done. It was much important, and they were more concerned about trust. And this is what the IRD found previously too, that people were more ready to trust researchers with custodianship of their data where a relationship of trust had been established. The second issue was to establish a framework and ethical guidelines for the research governance. At the time, most of the guidelines that were available referred to research in an HIC or high-income country context. There was very little guidance which helped us with the real-world issues that LMIC researchers faced when carrying out research in an LMIC country. Our response was twofold. Firstly, to publish our own guidelines. It was based on international best norms and also included the cultural, social, and moral norms that were unique and specific to Sri Lanka. I was very happy to have a friend here today, Paul Ndebele, who had commented and remembered this research ethics from a developing world perspective guidelines as it was published a very long time ago. And he remembered that, and he mentioned that it was very heartening to think that we had had some impact so far away in the world as well. Now we are in the process of updating this document because we still think that there's a need for research guidelines for the developing world, particularly in these issues of data and biobanking. And the other second measure that we undertook was to engage in extensive capacity building in ethics. We had several programs over the past 20 years. frequently funded by the Wellcome Trust again, to improve ethics research capacity in Sri Lanka. This was done over the past 20 years and culminated with the UNESCO inviting the IRD to collaboratively conduct ethics research workshops in Sri Lanka. Then the third and the most difficult challenge, as I mentioned earlier, was to decide whether we would go for the rapid but short-term gains through data sample transfer to our HIC research partners, or if we should endeavor for long-term capacity building in Sri Lanka. Now, while we were writing this case study presentation, the IRD team reflected on what made our team trust the HIC partners. The first things that came up was that they were very generous in sharing their expertise, and the fact that they were the ones who initiated the extensive capacity building exercises. They were very respectful of cultural sensitivities, and they were respectful of the work that the Sri Lankan researchers put in and recognized it, for example, by giving first authorship to the Sri Lankan researchers. And looking at the audience, I see someone else that had given us huge support from our early stages of ethics work, Doug Wazanar. He had been a huge supporter of our early ethics research efforts. And he's an exemplification of what we mentioned in terms of supporting for capacity building rather than promoting data transfer and relegating the Sri Lankan researchers merely to data gatherers. So, whilst our HIC research partners were very collaborative, respectful of the efforts that were undertaken there were issues that came up. For example, these are examples of some of the papers that were published. But the problems that came up happened when there was a concern that if we were trying to analyze all the data in the biobank in Sri Lanka itself, it would lead to time-consuming efforts, that it would be difficult to build capacity in Sri Lanka, that it would be quicker and better to send the data abroad, send the samples abroad, and have it analyzed abroad. We were facing that dilemma, but ultimately the IRD committee decided that no, we would make the best efforts to build that capacity in Sri Lanka. The end result was that a genetic laboratory was established in Sri Lanka, the necessary capacity was built in Sri Lanka, and even today we engage in research related to genomics because of those efforts, and it has been over the past, since 2012, over the past 6 years, we have been engaging continuously in genomics research in a wide variety of ways. Now, on to the final section, the two themes that I mentioned about developing institutional infrastructure and capacity building in LMIC. The most common reasoning and justification for data and sample transfer is the lack of expertise in LMIC. And we say at the IRT that the potential for expertise already exists in LMIC. And what is necessary is to hone that skill set, and that it can be certainly done. The example that I mentioned to you earlier is the global financial sector. It is over $10 trillion in size. This industry has actually very effectively harnessed and utilized the human capacity in LMIC to benefit from the human and institutional capacity in LMIC in countries such as India, Sri Lanka, the Philippines, Eastern European countries, for example, Poland. The global outsourcing industry that resulted from this institutional and human capacity building in LMIC countries is now over $100 billion in size. The work in the financial sector has been outsourced to countries like Sri Lanka, India, and data scientists, for example, work a lot in this industry. If it has been done in the financial sector, there's no reason why it can't be done in the healthcare research sector. Which brings me to my earlier slide of London Stock Exchange and the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. What do they have in common? They are both very large databases. The backbone of a stock exchange is a very large database that holds the personal and financial data of a large amount of people. And what do they have in common? The London Stock Exchange and the Johannesburg Stock Exchange both are run by, developed and maintained by data scientists in Sri Lanka. If there are data scientists who can run the largest stock exchange in the world, there's no reason why Sri Lankan or Indian or Filipino or Brazilian or Argentine data scientists cannot be trained for the research sector, healthcare research. That expertise does exist. All that is needed is to hone that skill set. Then the last small thing, another matter, that these are the top companies using big data. If Google can do it, or Oracle can do it, if Facebook can do it, if Microsoft can do it, there's no reason why research centers can't be established in Brazil, in India, in the Philippines, in Sri Lanka. They are all benefiting from the human capacity in these countries. All that is needed is the will to hone the capacity, build that research capacity there. The little small step that I mentioned earlier is that, well, we all recognize that funding agencies have significant power. And we recognize that most of the funding agencies have taken already several steps to level this playing field, for example. For example, the MRC UK has grant award conditions described like that. The ownership of all intellectual assets will rest with the organization that generates them. So any intellectual assets that are generated in Sri Lanka rest with the Sri Lankan institution. However, research is usually administered through an intermediary institution in an HIC. The second side, on the right-hand side, the intermediary institution usually then has a contract with the LMIC institution. That institution has this clause in that contract, which says that all results, all intellectual property assets that are generated vest in the UK institution. Now, when this happened to us, we pointed it out to them and said that, could you please align your contract with the word and the spirit of the funding institution, the MRC in the MRC UK in this case, and then they changed the wording to reflect what the MRC says, that intellectual property should vest in the local organization which generates those assets. So, if the funding agencies could take a step to create awareness among the intermediary institutions which administer the research grants, for example, the universities or the intermediary institutions in the high-income countries, that would be a step closer to achieving that level playing field that we would all like to see. So, finally, to acknowledge, but the most importantly, to acknowledge the team that made this research project possible, the IRD Executive Committee and everyone who was involved in that, including our research partners who are here. Thank you very much.